and it is my high honor to be able to now introduce New Hampshire U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen for a few words.
Thank you all. Thank you, Scott, for that nice introduction. And I have some show and tell that I brought, so I'm just going to put it down there. It's so exciting to be here with all of you who share my passion for the importance of early childhood education, and I'm sure who know so much and have been working on this issue for such a very long time. I know we've got a lot of very important people in the room, and you're getting ready to eat lunch, so I'm not going to call out anybody, but there's one person that I really wanted to call out because she's been in the trenches working on this issue. She's responsible in large part for this forum, and she is there every day doing everything she can to promote early childhood education, and I think Jackie Cowell deserves a real round of applause. Back there. Wow. The goal of making sure every child gets a good start in life is every bit as important as President Kennedy's plan to put a man on the moon, or an American on the moon, within the decade. And one of the things he said is that we do this not because it's easy, but we do it because it's hard. And I know that expanding access to early childhood education, getting universal pre-K is not going to be easy, because I've been working on it with so many of you for such a long time. It's going to be hard, but we've got to do it because it's going to make such a difference in the future of our kids, in the future of this country, and in our ability to compete in the world. When I was governor, my first governor's meeting I went to in Washington had Rob Reiner there with a number of experts presenting the scientific research on early brain development. And I remember being so impressed by that because some of you have heard this story. They showed a graph of child development, and they compared it to public expenditures on children. And I got so excited about this and talked about it so much that I had the opportunity to chair the Education Commission of the States as I was leaving the governor's office, and made early childhood the focus of my tenure there. And so when I left, they gave me that graph. Now, I tried to see if we could put it up on the screen, but we don't have the technology. So you may not be able to see this very well, but what you ought to be able to see is that there's a line here that starts and goes up very dramatically in the earliest years of a child's life. And then it levels out later on. And then there's another line here that starts really low in those early years in a child's life and goes up dramatically as kids get older. Well, this is early brain development, and this is public spending on children. We are spending our resources where they are least effective because we are not supporting early childhood education. So we end up getting the least bang for the buck. As Kevin said, this is something that should appeal to everybody in the room. I used to always say, if you don't support it because it's the right thing to do, you should support it because it's the cost-effective thing to do. And a 2003 study by the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank looked at the return on investment in early education in Minnesota. And the study found an ROI of as high as $8 for every dollar invested, which is a far greater return than any other public investment in economic development, I can tell you. And other studies have shown the return to be as high as $17 for every dollar invested in early learning. And so I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but why is that? It's because children who have those high-quality early experiences are less likely to repeat grades. The mayor of Nashua is here, Mayor Lozo. One of the things that we learned from Nashua when they were talking about public kindergarten is they looked at how kids were doing in repeating grades, and they discovered that kids who didn't have kindergarten were much more likely to repeat grades, and so it was cost effective. They are less likely to require remedial education, to engage in criminal activity, or to utilize the social safety net later in life. So we can spend the money in the early years when it's most effective, or we can wait and use it for prisons and for remedial education and to support high school dropouts. It makes so much more sense to do it in the early years. And one of the studies that has just came out that has had the biggest impact on me is something called the early catastrophe, the 30 million word gap by age 3. How many of you have seen this study? A number of you. Okay, well, what it says is it was done by the University of Kansas, and researchers went into the homes of 42 families from various socioeconomic backgrounds to assess the ways in which daily exchanges between a parent and child shape language and vocabulary development. And their findings were unprecedented and I think in many ways shocking. Differences in parent-child interactions produce significant discrepancies in not only the children's knowledge, but also their skills and experiences, with children from high-income families being exposed to 30 million more words than children from families on welfare. I mean, imagine, 30 million more words. And follow-up studies show that these differences in language and interaction experiences have lasting effects on a child's performance in life. And a study by Robert Putnam, who we know well in New Hampshire, showed that parents with professional degrees annually delivered about 166,000 words of encouragement. He called them encouragements, and 26,000 discouragements. Working class parents delivered 62,000 encouragements and 36,000 discouragements, and parents on welfare delivered 26,000 encouragements and 57,000 discouragements. I think that shows us so dramatically why this is so important. This is something the business community recognizes. As governor, I recognized it, and we were able to expand public kindergarten with a lot of bipartisan support from people in this room. Governors who succeeded me continued that expansion of kindergarten and implementing it. And now we have this opportunity to go and look at the earlier years before kindergarten, because even that is almost too late. I just wanted to give you an update before I close on where we are in Washington, because we are, as I think most of you know, reforming No Child Left Behind, and we have a Senate version of legislation called the Every Child Achieves Act, and it does include important provisions to ensure that ESEA funds can be used for early education programs, and it also creates a new grant program that is specifically targeted at improving the quality of these programs. So it would ensure that funds from Title I, so programs to support disadvantaged students, Title II, programs to support teachers and school leaders, and Title III, which are programs serving English language learners, can be used to strengthen and expand early childhood education programs. So that's a really important development, I think, as we think about funding that will be available to help with early childhood programs. Now, unfortunately, we have a House that has not included that flexibility in their legislation, so we have to get some agreement, and we are just at the beginning of that process. But clearly, as all of the speakers have said, this is a bipartisan issue. We need to work together to get it done. And here in New Hampshire, over the next 6 months or so, we have a tremendous opportunity to talk to the candidates very directly about what their position is on this issue. And as Mark Shriver said so well, it's not enough to give lip service to the topic. Everybody now understands that this is important, hopefully, who's running for President of the United States. But we have also got to look at and to pin people down, our elected officials down, on what are they willing to do about it. What's the record been? How have they voted when the votes have come up? Have they been willing to put the resources into this issue? Have they been willing to support reforms to make sure that kids can get the education they need? And this is the opportunity that we have. I hope all of you here will take advantage of that opportunity and make sure that as you're going into the voting booth, as the last panel just said, that you know where they stand on early childhood education, and more importantly, what they're willing to do to make a difference for our kids. So thank you all very much for what you have done, and I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Senator, thank you very much. We've had the opportunity to hear from a lot of our policy leaders and folks who are true experts in this field of early learning. And our next messenger will come from the business community. As we know, and as we've reinforced through all of this coalition, this approach that's nonpartisan, bipartisan, that includes all of us, is so essential. And to come introduce that next speaker is someone who's a dear friend of mine, and someone that I would be remiss if I didn't pause for 1 second and point out that there's another group that's incredibly important in this conversation. You and I know that all of us could scream from the mountaintops all that we have learned this morning and repeat it over and over again and probably only get so far. Social media is wonderful and all of our friends will hear us, but we can only take that message so far. We need our allies and our friends in the media to be able to do much of this as well. And so my friend Matt Mowry of Business New Hampshire Magazine is coming up to do the next introduction, but I would like a very loud round of applause because he's been an incredible ally in this effort in educating our public and helping us in this pursuit.
That is a very kind introduction for doing my job. Oh, and back in the days when I was blonde, blue-eyed, and skinny. So I got introduced to this as early childhood education as a business concept through Early Learning New Hampshire and Spark New Hampshire. And through them, I was able to attend Ready Nation Summit a couple of years ago in Georgia. And like this, it was chock full of experts and compelling information, and it just made business sense. And so we launched a series of articles about a year and a half ago that started off with our cover story on why babies matter to business. And it's been very widely received. But beyond the research that I was exposed to in doing these stories, I've been able to see the impact of development firsthand when my wife and I became foster parents to a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And our 2-year-old over these past 2 years has gone from a child who did not laugh, who did not sing, and who would hit his head against a wall because that's how he dealt with being sad or frustrated, to now being a 4-year-old who laughs a lot, who sings a lot, including his ABCs, who counts proudly because his older brother can do it, and who's learning to express his emotions. And we went from having a 4-year-old who couldn't sit still for story time, and never mind other classroom activities, to becoming a sight word specialist in kindergarten, and to reading to me at night, and quite proudly kind of crushing it in first grade right now. And that was due not only to a stable and loving home that we were able to provide, but to a whole team of people that provided early interventions and early engagement in these children's life, from social workers to therapists to wonderful early childhood learning center and to great teachers. And when children receive all that early on, those great interventions and engagement, they are able to make dramatic and powerful connections. I learned that firsthand when we started broaching the subject of adoption with my oldest child. And I asked him, in trying to make sure he understood what we were doing, you know, if I'm going to be your daddy, and Lisa's going to become your mommy forever, what does that make you? And we were just looking for him to say son. But instead, my son looked at me, and he said, happy. Oh, it gets better. And I said, oh, bud, that makes me so happy too. I said, but do you know what else that makes you? And he looked at me again, and he said, loved. And that is the power of early intervention and engagement in a child's life. It's also why I am grateful for leaders like our next speaker, who are rallying support for early childhood education as a business issue, and making us realize that this is important to us as a business community and to the future of our workforce pipeline. Our keynote speaker, John E. Pepper Jr., is co-chair of the Ready Nation CEO Task Force on Early Childhood. He is the former chairman and CEO of Procter & Gamble and the former chairman of the Walt Disney Company. He will talk to us today about why, in his retirement, his passion has become early childhood. So please join me in welcoming John Pepper to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. What a wonderful gathering this is. It has to give someone like myself, coming from Ohio and believing in this, such encouragement. But to see a coming together here of foundations, of endowments, of business community, and just so many of you in the room behind this critical imperative. I am, as Matt suggested, and thank you for the introduction, Matt, and what you're doing, I am one of 30 retired or current CEOs and one of 1,300 business leaders who are attached to Ready Nation. And you'll find on the table there some documents, and I would invite all of you from the business community who would be willing to sign up and become a member of Ready Nation as we take this message forward. In a sense, I felt as I came before you today that all of us here are really speaking on behalf of 7 to 8 million 3- and 4-year-olds across this country, and some 20,000 3- and 4-year-olds in the state of New Hampshire who are not now receiving quality early childhood development, without which we know their life faces real limitations. I have come to see this imperative of early childhood education as the social and the moral and the economic imperative of our generation. We talk about a lot of deficits in this country today. We talk about job deficits, budget deficits, but there is one deficit that impacts all of the others, and it is the deficit in the early childhood development of our children, 0 to 5. It's a deficit compared to other countries. It's a deficit marked tremendously by racial and income disparities, as we all know. And it's a disparity that we not only know how to close, but we can close in a way financially that makes it, in business terms, an absolute no-brainer. I think we'd all agree from what we've heard this morning, anyone sitting here would simply wonder, when are you going to get it done? And I think the reaction would simply be, it is certainly mine, and I'm sure yours, let's just do it. Yes, thank you. Let's just do it. I first started to work on childhood education 30 years ago, mid-80s, working with Governor Voinovich and later Senator Voinovich on his education task force. We remain far from where we should be today. What makes this particularly concerning, really maddening as far as I'm concerned, is what we now know on the impact of early childhood development on a total life of a child. We know that there are critical gaps in the development of young adults today, and I won't go through them in any detail. We've heard about them from Pat and from the General. Our high school dropout rate is 20%. In major metro areas, it's 40 to 50%. This is at a time when 70% of all new jobs in the next 5 years are going to require more than a high school education, and yet we have 25 and 40% in some places dropouts. It's no wonder that today we have this terrible anomaly of having 10 million unemployed people and 4 million jobs that we cannot fill because we don't have a qualified person. The consequences of being a high school dropout are worse than ever. Unemployment in double digits, income, even if it's there, at a level that probably has you on food stamps. And it affects the next generation, and we can never forget this. Only 5% of the children of a high school dropout will go to college. 5% of a high school dropout will ever go to college. And I cannot get out of my mind the fact that 70% of the 2.3 million incarcerated men and women in this country, highest level of incarceration by a ratio of 4 to 1 on a per capita basis versus any other country in the world, 70% of those men and women are high school dropouts. This, ladies and gentlemen, is tragedy of the greatest order. As we've all heard and we all know, the root causes of high school dropouts go way back. They go back to the question of whether a child's ready for kindergarten. And less than half of the children in this country today are ready to go to kindergarten. That's a fact. On learning proficiency, we heard again today that on testing, our children are in the bottom half, perhaps in the top of the bottom third, across to other developing countries. But this is something I didn't know until recently. If you break the children down into two groups, one group being school districts where 75% or more are on a subsidized lunch program, in those schools, we are the worst country in the world among 24 and 25 developing countries. And yes, you take the other side, school districts where less than 10% of the children are on subsidized lunch programs, and we are the highest of the country. The ravage of poverty has to be addressed, and early childhood education is the path to do it. It goes on. Just one generation, we were the #1 country in the world in the percentage of our young adults who have been to college. Does anyone know where we are now? We're number 12. In one generation, we have slipped from #1 to number 12. The sad fact, the bottom line fact is that 25 to 30%, we don't know exactly, but a substantial number of our young people today are not job ready, they're not career ready, and most importantly, perhaps, they're not life ready. They're not life ready. We all know it doesn't have to be this way. We've heard major reasons why it doesn't have to be this way this morning, and we cannot allow it to remain this way. Not if we're going to be the community, the state, or the nation that we strive and know we need and can be. It's been exciting, truly exciting, what we've learned in the past 10 years, much of it revealed here this morning. What does it start with? The fact that, yes, 90% of the brain develops during those 5 years. I've been saying that fact for probably 5 years, but little understanding that I have about what that really, really means. And I won't repeat what we've seen here today. I will say I saw a PACS presentation in New York on Friday, and I was with my 26-month-old grandson in Norwich, Vermont over the weekend. And I think I tried at least to interact with Bo in a different way than I would have if I hadn't seen Pat's presentation on Friday. I was doing a better job of pointing, drawing him out. What color is this? This is irrefutable science, absolutely irrefutable science, and we must act on it. Of greatest importance to somebody like me, who's grown up trying to connect data to see cause and effect, one thing leads to another, has been the irrefutable development of evidence now, and you all know it, over the last, really, I'd say 10 years convincingly, though we have old studies going back to '68, how it all connects, and how that kindergarten readiness score equates to third grade reading proficiency, how that relates to dropout rate, and how that relates to everything else. We've been lucky down in Southwest Ohio. 10 years ago, we started under the United Way Strive program, a very high-quality early childhood education program. And we now can know that of the children ready for kindergarten, okay, if they're ready for kindergarten, 86% of them are reading on grade at the end of the third grade. Those that were not ready for kindergarten, that same number, 86, becomes 59. That's almost a 30-point delta. Now, you just don't see many of them in business, right? I mean, that is something you look at and you say, you take action. Almost the same results are available coming out of San Francisco. Very similar results coming out of Maryland. Extraordinary consistency in being ready for kindergarten to third grade reading. And why does that matter? Well, most of you know, children not ready for, not reading proficiently at the end of the third grade is 4 times more likely to drop out. And if they're poor and living in a poor neighborhood, they're 11 to 17 times more likely to drop out of high school than if they were reading proficiently. Now, when I heard this, I had a nagging worry. And it was, what about poverty? Even in a poor situation, will a child be able to do it? So I would like to tell you a quick story of my contact with the maps. I asked for 2 maps to be put together about Cincinnati neighborhoods. One map profiled area by area income, and the other kindergarten readiness scores. And I put them on top of each other. What I found was exactly what you'd expect, an almost perfect correlation. Higher income, higher readiness scores, lower income, lower readiness scores. However, there were 3 pockets, communities within Cincinnati that I immediately saw that while in the very poorest area, they had kindergarten readiness scores equal to our highest income area. Well, that got me interested. I guess my curiosity was piqued. And I went out to see the first of them. It was in Winton Woods, government housing. And what did I find? I found a quality preschool where the kids were so raptured in interaction with the teacher, they didn't even know I walked in the room. I found not only that this preschool was attached to the early childhood so that the 0 to 3 was being mapped directly in. I found they were working directly with the kindergarten so that that passage would be good. I found that they were hooked up with a food bank and that they had health people coming in to check with the kids. I saw a holistic, community-centered activity, and those children coming from the poorest area were as ready to go to kindergarten, and I found out then from the school how they were doing as they went through, and they were up there right at the top. There are a number of reasons why business people like me care about this, beyond, I would say, the social and moral development that it means, though that's all important. One is we become paranoid when we see somebody else doing something better than we are. And we think it's important. And I think paranoid is the word. That is how we feel. And we see that happening right now all around the world. If we were in Frankfurt, Germany today, and I was talking to that audience, or in Paris, France, I would be telling them that 90% of the 4-year-olds are in quality pre-K. China has made the commitment to have 70% of all of its children go to not 1, not 2, but 3 years of preschool by the year 2020. And you know, they've got the money to do it. And they probably have more of a command structure when it comes to legislatures than we do in this country. But folks, this is happening around us, and we're falling behind in other areas. This is nuts. We've learned something else, and there's been several references to it today, and yes, it's the economics. If you didn't care about anything else, and all you cared about was the financial future, you do this. You've heard the numbers. I've studied dozens of these analyses over the past 10 years. They go from 2 to 1, if you've heard, and I think that's a real safe number, and I'll take a 2 to 1 return every day of the week in business. And they go up to 7 to 1, and they go up to 17 to 1. And you saw the chart from the senator. This chart, linking how much you spend 90% after it's over. This drives people in business nuts. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. And it isn't like we need to go from 5% to 10%. We don't. I've had people, in light of all these facts, and question may be on some of your mind today, it wouldn't surprise me, is why with all of this is it taking us so long to get to quality pre-K and what surrounds it? Well, I think there are at least 3 reasons. One, substantively, is a lot of the knowledge we're talking about wasn't here 10 years ago. Or let me put it this way. It's been amplified in ways that we've seen today, in ways that simply weren't there before, and it's taking us time to get it out. The second, and I think, Mark, you mentioned this, the voice of the people who most will benefit from this in terms of at least the income, they're faint voices. They don't lobby. Kids don't lobby. A lot of the moms don't lobby. And another reason is it costs money, and I'll come back to that. But another is that we'll hear comments sometimes about fade out. I've had this brought up to me with a lot of people. Some of you probably have. Oh, we hear it's good, but it all fades out by the 3rd grade. And there have been some studies, usually attached to a poor quality pre-K, or maybe terrible continuity afterwards, that show that. But don't make any mistake. The overwhelming majorities of studies that have been done on this, recent ones like in Tulsa, New Jersey, going back to 1998, good studies. The ones in Cincinnati, the ones in San Francisco and Maryland, they show that there are indeed cognitive benefits that last. But what's been missed by so many are the executive functions that come from this. What we've heard of is the social and emotional benefits. Let me tell you a quick story on that point. I happened to be in a museum, outside a museum in Cincinnati, about 6 months ago, and there were probably about 25 young kids there. They were kindergartens. They were all kindergartners. And then their teachers were there, 4 or 5 teachers, and the teachers were at one table. And I went to the teachers and I said, looking at the group of kids, did any of your kindergartners go to pre-K? And they talked around for a few seconds and came up, yeah, 4 or 5 out of the 20. So of course, I asked them, do you see any difference in those 4 to 5 who went to pre-K? Oh, Mr. Pepper, we see an enormous difference. I said, what is the difference? It was not what I would have expected, though it would after hearing Pat and Ellen. It was not that they would read more letters or count more numbers. No, it was that they were willing to share, that they were staying on task, that they'd learned to come out of the home and come back and with the sense that they weren't being lost. Experts agree on this. We couldn't have had it presented in a more compelling way, in my view, than we had this morning from these wonderful leaders in this field. This is why These studies over 20-plus years show these huge benefits that show up in employment, family formation, health, income, all the rest that comes from what we want for all our children. Healthy development, lead a good life. Is quality pre-K a magic bullet? No, not in my view, there aren't any. I think it has to be especially emphasized again and again, the element of quality in the interaction. But I also think we need, particularly with families that are poor, to bring that holistic community around it for health, maybe for food on the table, for job development, whatever it might be. I liken quality pre-K, if I might, it's like a vaccine. It's not been proven to be a total or a universal cure, but we do know that it makes a life-changing difference in the lives of countless people and children. What's more, this vaccine pays out. You give this vaccine and you actually save money. And yet, unaccountably today, we are only giving this vaccine to about 25% of the young 3- and 4-year-olds in this country. We are failing to act on the truth, and to me, that borders on being criminal. Doing so will require more money. However, not only will this investment come back 2 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, we ought to keep the amount of money in perspective. The total amount of money needed to provide quality pre-K to every 3- and 4-year-old in this nation is about 5% of our total defense budget. To every 3- and 4-year-old, about 5%. And even more pointedly, perhaps, the cost of providing quality development experience to over 5 million 4-year-olds is what is spent today on incarcerating 2.3 million men and women each year. Ladies and gentlemen, let me sum it up. We need to act on what we know to be true. We need to act on what we have learned if we are to be the nation, the state, the community, the city that we aspire to be, socially, morally, and economically. I choose the word morally intentionally. I do not see how we can any longer honor this sober promise of our Declaration of Independence if we do not now honor what we know to be true. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It is written that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As we all know, we've interpreted what that really means and calls on us to do differently over the years. I believe we've reached the point of knowledge and experience to assert that it is the inalienable right of every child to have the quality learning experience during the most important stage of their life that provides them with a chance, a fair chance, to be all they can be. Thank you. Thank you. I will close my remarks with some good news and a challenge. The good news is that the public gets it. Poll after poll is showing that 70% of men and women of all parties, and a majority, will support public funding for quality pre-K. And yes, as we've heard, the coverage is expanding, albeit far too slowly. Governors from over 30 states, red and blue, have increased or advocated for higher spending. I'm so happy to see an increasing number of cities, most recently New York City, 65,000 young people in quality pre-K, in pre-K, it must be quality, this year. We've seen Denver renew a ballot initiative, started in 2006, renewed it this year to provide it for 4-year-olds and moving on to 3-year-olds. San Antonio, and my town, my city of Cincinnati, is committed to have a ballot initiative in November 2016, which, when passed, will provide quality pre-K to every 3- and 4-year-olds in Cincinnati. That's 5,000 more than receive it today. Yes, there is momentum. There is momentum. And I've reached a point now where I know this will happen. The evidence is so irrefutable. There are only two issues. One is quality. It has to be quality. Without that, it won't work. And the second is we've got to get on with it. And I think we have to look at this very concretely. For every year we fail to do this is another cohort of 3- and 4-year-olds who we have failed to do what we know can make a difference to them, to our country, to our city, and economically valid. The time to do that is here in New Hampshire and across the country. You've heard the call, which I think is absolutely right, in talking to legislators. Ask them where they stand and tell them they won't have your support unless they support this issue. That's an easy call to make. I'd also urge that you look for opportunities to make this happen on a universal basis in a town or two, a city or two. It may happen in Manchester before it happens across the whole state. But there's nothing more valuable than getting an island, a demonstration in a particular state to have the rest of the state get on board. And with 400 different municipalities, there have got to be a lot of opportunities to actually make it happen sooner rather than later. Theodore Roosevelt said something on October the 12th, 1912, at Madison Square Garden that I will close with and that inspires me and I offer to you today. He said, "Perhaps once in a generation there comes a chance for people of a country to play their part wisely and fearlessly in some great battle of the age-long warfare for human rights. We know there are in life injustices which we are powerless to remedy, but we also know that there is much injustice which can be remedied. We propose to lift the burdens from the poor. We propose to stand for the sacred rights of childhood." Close quote. That is what we're talking about today. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask, and I'm so encouraged to see you all here, that we join together to provide the same opportunity to all children, that we would spend the last ounce of our money and give the last ounce of our effort to provide to our own children and to our own grandchildren. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Thank you.